So the way our sessions are going to unfold over the next 4 weeks, you've already received the outline of how we're going to cover the chapters, 5 chapters. Today we're doing the introduction and the first 2 chapters. So what will happen, we'll take about 20 minutes for either Sister Elizabeth or myself to kind of summarize the content of the chapter, give any background that might be necessary for the chapter, and then open it up to conversation, particularly focusing on hearing from people speaking out of their own tradition. So like, what are the ramifications, implications of this encyclical for your tradition, or even the context in which you serve? If you're serving in a parish or in a community ministry, what might this have to say to where you're doing ministry? And also part of the conversation will be looking ahead. Right now over these 4 weeks, it's going to be a very cursory kind of reading. What we're really doing is just reading it in community and working our way through it. That way, we might want to consider, what do we want to do that might be a bit more substantial, more in-depth, in the fall or at some other time, whether as a community of Queen's College and the wider community, or where you are, something that you might want to do with your community. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Sister Elizabeth, who's going to do a summary of the chapters we're covering today.
And I may be slightly longer than 20 minutes today, simply because I want to set the context for what an encyclical is. To do that will take a little bit more time. So I will use slides that I will speak from. And if you give me a second to share them.
Yes, we'll allow more than 20 minutes, seeing as who you are.
Try that again. So I should be able to see my slides now.
Yes. There we are.
So as Robert said, what I will want to do today then is just give you the context of what an encyclical is and what are some of the key messages in the introduction. Then I will do the first 2 chapters, and then we will engage in conversation. It's interesting, in the piece I will be doing with you, there is very little mention of artificial intelligence. Pope Leo is an Augustinian priest, and he works out of their tradition. So he takes lots of time at the beginning to help us understand what the social doctrine of the church is. You all know what the doctrine of the church is, but what is the social doctrine? And it's coming out of his approach is actually quite instructive for all of us to really understand the significance of this encyclical far beyond just the Roman Catholic Church. So I'm just going to name for you the different ways in the Roman Catholic tradition that social doctrine is presented. The highest level, if you will, is the Apostolic Constitution. And these are documents that are dealing with the essence of the church, the governance and structures of the church. The most famous apostolic constitutions in my lifetime came from the Second Vatican Council, the 2 documents on the church itself, Lumen Gentium and Gaudium et Spes. The highest outside then of a council would be the encyclical. And earlier, the Pope sent the encyclicals only to the bishops within the church. But in recent times, these encyclicals tend to be sent to all the faithful of the church. And in most recent times, they're sent to all the people of the world, not just to Roman Catholics. They tend to be on doctrinal or moral or social issues rather than the structure and the governance of the church. Then we have a lesser weight, if you will, de motu proprios. They're usually administrative or disciplinary matters. If I were to be excommunicated, that would probably happen that way. Then what we call bulls, which comes from the seal that's put on them, and they're things like establishing new dioceses or canonizing the saints. Then we have apostolic letters, usually to individuals rather than to everybody. And then apostolic exhortations, which are really encouraging documents, not directive, but more encouraging. So an encyclical, when the council is not in session, and we haven't had a council in the Roman Catholic Church since 1965, the encyclical would be the most weighty document. So for Pope Leo to present this encyclical tells you how important it is, he believes, for the church at large, but also what an important message it is he wants to send to the society at large, if you will. The word encyclical really means a circular letter, nothing more magic than that. That's the wonder of Greek or Latin. You can make them sound very, very important, but very simple words. The encyclicals themselves, and this will be true for all our encyclicals, for all our major documents, their name is taken from the official title. The official title is taken from the first words of the encyclical. So, Magnifica Humanitas means magnificent humanity in English, but that's the first words of the encyclical, and that's where it gets its name. Now, those of you who study scripture know that that's very much a Jewish tradition. So, for example, in the Jewish tradition, the books of the Bible are named, and the important books like the Pentateuch are named by the first words of the book. So it's an old tradition. The best known encyclicals of our time, and that deal with the social doctrine of the church, began with Leo XIII, and it's interesting, Pope Leo XIV, I think, recognized that and sent a subtle message to us that he was going to be in that kind of thinking. So his encyclical, which is really, by our standards, the first encyclical that talks about social doctrine, was Rerum Novarum, simply means new things, and it addressed the economic struggles of workers during the Industrial Revolution. Pope John XXIII, at the beginning of the Vatican Council, gave us a very beautiful encyclical on peace on earth. And he was writing, as you would know, in the 1960s around the Cold War. The most famous in my lifetime would be Laudato Si from Pope Francis, and he was the first one who dared to put into an encyclical how important integral ecology is and how important caring for the environment is. And as you know, every major world tradition after that encyclical wrote a similar message to its people. And now Pope Leo's encyclical on human dignity and artificial intelligence. Here is Pope Leo signing his encyclical, and the first words, English loses in the translation. If you saw the translation in Latin or Italian or Spanish, you would see where Magnifica Humanitas comes from. Humanity, created by God in all its grandeur, is today facing a pivotal choice, either to construct a new Tower of Babel or to build a city in which God and humanity dwell together. So that's the very first words of this encyclical. Pope Leo did some interesting things. Well, first of all, the encyclical is very long, 42,000 words. But he presented it himself, which is unusual, and he presented it with a panel of people, and that panel of people had on it three cardinals, Cardinal Parolin, who's the Secretary of State for the Vatican, Cardinal Fernandez, who's the Doctrine of the Faith for the Roman Catholic Church, and Cardinal Cherney, who's a Canadian, who's the director of the Dicastery for Human Development. So you have the Secretary of State, which has all to do with politics. You have the Doctrine of the Faith, which is to do with our faith tradition, and you have human development, which is so integral to this encyclical. They were all represented by the three cardinals, and there were two theologians, both women, Anna Rowlands from England and Leocadie Lushmodo teaches in the United States, but she's actually from the Congo. And the co-founder of Anthropic, which is one of the major AI companies in the world. And I don't even know if he's a believer. So symbolically, this panel tells us very much about the heart of this encyclical. Pope Francis uses this imagery of the Tower of Babel and the building of the temple by Nehemiah after the exile. He says about the Tower of Babel, a project conceived without reference to God, supported by a uniformity that eliminated diversity and that chose homogenization over communion. And you can see what the threads are here. No reference to God, uniformity rather than diversity, homogenization rather than communion. And you're going to see these threads all the way through the imagery in this encyclical. Whereas Nehemiah, when the people come back after the exile, when they build the new temple in the new city of Jerusalem, the city is reborn, as the document says, through the shared responsibility of all. It is an undertaking with God at the center, which rebuilds relationships before rebuilding with stones. And Pope Leo will use that imagery, contrasting the two, the building of the Tower of Babel, the building of Nehemiah's temple, to get these messages across. And he challenges us to avoid what he calls the Babel syndrome, the idolatry of profit that sacrifices the weak, the uniformity that neutralizes differences, and that a pretense that a single language, even a digital one, can translate everything, including the mystery of the person, into data and performance. So a not subtle hint about what he's going to be saying about artificial intelligence. He reminds us that every generation is faced with different challenges in creating a just world. In our faith tradition, we believe that's our place, our responsibility, our mission, as we use that language, to create a world where the dignity of every person is safeguarded, justice is promoted, and community is made possible. Every generation will face those challenges in many different ways. But that same challenge reminds us that we can also create an inhumane and more unjust world. So it's not just neutral. We can actually do the very opposite. And artificial intelligence then, and this is the rare mention of this in these first sections, says that looking at the challenge that artificial intelligence presents, we have to look at our own social doctrine, our own teachings, to ensure that that development is in fidelity to the gospel. Now, notice from the beginning, Pope Leo is not saying we should deny or stop or prevent artificial intelligence happening. He is saying that it is a development that must be done in fidelity to the gospel. And that is why Christopher Olah was at that panel, to send that message. We are not saying artificial intelligence is bad, it's an evil, it's to be prevented. Rather, it's saying we need to develop this appropriately in the context of that just world. He also spends a fair amount of time really saying what business is us of the church, any of our churches. What business is it for us to be talking about artificial intelligence? Surely that's the responsibility of the state or private actors, not the church. But he says in Article 21, when the dignity of our brothers and sisters is violated, when politics fails to address the tragedies of humanity, when the economy turns against the person, or science oversteps the limits of its competence, the Church, together with other Christian denominations and believers of other religion, must make her voice heard, not to dominate, but to promote communion. So not only have we got the right to be present in this space to talk about the development of artificial intelligence, we actually have the responsibility to be in this space. And he says, therefore, we need to turn to social doctrine. What the social doctrine of the Church then gives us are the principles for thought, the criteria for discernment and judgment, and concrete guidelines for action. That's the benefit that we bring to this space where we talk about how artificial intelligence is being developed. Always, as he said, coming back to a clear Christian witness with joy in service to the world. You're going to see mentioned over and over and over and over again in this encyclical that phrase, the common good. And he, in the first introduction, Pope Leo is telling us what we mean when we're talking about the common good. He said it includes building on a firm foundation with God. It includes accepting the limits and weaknesses of humanity without considering them an error to be corrected. There's a beautiful passage later on we will be talking about, not today, talking about the dignity of the person in the context of our frailty and our vulnerability. It talks about building a world where everyone can flourish, and that will require both shared responsibility and courage because of the tensions and differences not seen as evils but as creative forces. And it requires what he calls an evangelical language, the language of the gospel, dignity of the human person, the universal designation of goods, the preferential option for the poor, care for our common home, and peace. And here he uses the title being The Grandeur of Humanity. In the era of artificial intelligence, when human dignity is threatened by new forms of dehumanization, ours is the pressing duty to remain profoundly human. We must lovingly safeguard the grandeur of humanity bestowed upon us and revealed in its fullness in Christ, the fullness, splendor of which no machine can ever replace. Now, I will tell you, ironically, this is probably one of the most controversial articles in the whole of the encyclical. And it's the one verb that Pope Leo uses here, our pressing duty to remain profoundly human. Christian theologians who are influenced by the theology of Teilhard de Chardin or by the modern day theology of people like Elia Delio are saying that we are not remaining profoundly human, that we are continuing to grow into what it means to be human, that we're continuing to advance in what it means to be human. So they really challenge the phrase to remain profoundly human. Leo is using it here in the context of safeguarding that grandeur of humanity, but they feel that it should be more nuanced. So what do we mean when we use the phrase social doctrine as opposed to doctrine of the faith? Social doctrine in our tradition, and I suspect in all of our traditions of the people on this call, is the church walking alongside humanity, recognizing the autonomy of earthly realities and the distinction between ecclesial and political communities. So recognizing we don't have the full and absolute truth There are other players, other actors in our society that do have part of that. But neither are we relegated to what's that inner sanctum of personal life, that the church in its doctrine has a place in the society, the same way every government has a place in the society. And he repeats this on a number of occasions. And he says what we need to do, though, in that realm, in that space where we're speaking to the world at large, is that we're doing so in partnership with, in debate with, in conversation with scientific research and other leaders in the society, so that we can together form the best way forward. So it's not the place of the church and its social doctrine to supplant the responsibilities of politics and institutions, but we become part of the foundation for collective discernment, ensuring that whatever the discernment is, it serves the dignity of persons and the vitality of communions and the common good. So it's really calling us to a shared discernment. The recent gathering of the church, Roman Catholic Church in Eastern churches in Rome at the Synod, this is very much at the heart of what the synodal church is called to become. So this is not an absolute truth clearly stated. This is talking about a concrete interweaving of lives and communities and cultures. It's not a truth that fears diversity, but welcomes and guides it. Recognizing that we come from many cultures, many vocations, many traditions, and that it's our conversation, our listening to each other and walking together that brings about the best we can be at any one point in history. It's intertwining what we believe to be revealed truths with the listening to the historical situation of our tradition and also the contemporary realities in which we find ourselves. And therefore, the social doctrine is rooted in the scripture, in the church fathers, in the developments since all through our 2,000-year history. The phrase social doctrine, though, wasn't used until we reached Pope Pius XII in our tradition, but it actually began with Pope Leo XIII at the end of the 19th century. And he, for the first time, had the church talk about the primacy of human labor over any mindset focused on finance and productivity. And that's an important issue, articulated for the first time, that profit, gaining more money, gaining more property, gaining more assets, is not to be at the danger of the human person. And Pope Leo XIII was the one who proclaimed that the gospel is very much linked to pursuing a more just social order. When we came to Pius XI, he added further to that and talked about the principle of subsidiarity, that what's carried out at the lower level should be carried out there if it can be. Pope Pius XII added to that, because of the time in which he lived, an international order based on justice, peace, and the recognition of human dignity. When Pope John XXIII came in the scene in the 1960s, he again talked about human rights as a shared framework, and he related that to lasting peace. In the Vatican II document on Gaudium et Spes, the document on the church, it talks about a church close to humanity. And there's that wonderful description, the very first words of Gaudium et Spes: the joys and the hopes, the griefs and the anxieties of the people of this age, especially those who are poor or in any way afflicted, these are the joys and hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the followers of Christ as well. Very different look at the synod than the one I attended in 2024. Pope Paul VI, after the Second Vatican Council, said that there are actually what he called social sin. There are structures in our society, economic and political structures, which can become structures of sin, which work against people, work against communion, work against peace. Pope John Paul II, he also talked about social doctrine, and he talked about how our faith and ancient wisdom can find an expression in the new time in which we find ourselves, but again, discerning how to respond to the new things that arise in every era. Pope Benedict, following him, he started to use the language of development. Justice, institutions, and the market are not neutral realities, but spaces where charity and truth must find historical expression. He talked about development as being inclusive and sustainable, as focusing on the common good, and as having both a critical and generative role of charity in public life. So we're starting with Pope Benedict XVI getting into language around development now, human development. Pope Francis, in his social doctrine, added 3 key points. One, he introduced us to the language of a church that walks together, that seeks to read the signs of the times in the light of the gospel, and allows herself to be evangelized by the poor. New language for us. He's also the one who introduced us to integral ecology and care for our common home, and links the two. The cry of the earth and the cry of the poor are one. And Pope Francis also talked about a humanity that chooses social friendship and universal fellowship. A culture of encounter is the language he uses. So what we have then, as we look at how we summarize social teaching, is what the Pope Leo XIV calls a theology of communion in history. And he says that all of that teaching, beginning with Leo XIII, right down to Leo XIV, over almost 150 years, is the dignity of the person, the value of work, the universal destination of goods, solidarity and subsidiarity, care for creation, and centrality of peace and community. That's where the church and all religious faith traditions, that's where we have our legitimate voice, ensuring as development occurs in society, these values are maintained. So he says the dignity of the person must always be attended to, and most particularly the dignity of those whose rights are often overlooked. And when he talks about human dignity, he says there are 4 ways of lenses, if you will. Moral dignity, the way each one of us makes our own choices. Social dignity, the living conditions in which we receive and how the society protects us or fails to protect us. Existential dignity, the way in which we perceive our own worth and the value of our lives. And then ontological dignity, the fact we have dignity simply because we're created by God, and God is incapable of creating something not good. Pope Leo references the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as an example of how our society, writ large, is attending to human rights and supporting what he talks about in terms of human dignity. Human rights are not, this is from the document, are not an external addition to the person, but an expression of intrinsic human dignity. So we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, very much consistent with the social doctrine of the church along that whole period of time. So that growth then, what's coming later since that Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is the recognition of minority rights growing slowly, although we're seeing some backtracking on that in society recently. He mentions specifically the rights of women, for example, need to be equally guaranteed throughout the world. And he says words are not enough. We can't talk about human dignity because our documents say it. They need to be reflected in concrete decisions and laws, access to employment, education, social and political responsibilities. And then he talks about the 5 principles of social doctrine that he will unfold in the subsequent chapters of the encyclical to show how these are related very much to how the development of artificial intelligence happens. Common good, universal destination of goods, subsidiarity, solidarity, and social justice. So the common good, as we've said before, is the social expression of the dignity of each person. He says the common good is the result of an interdependence that creates a network of social good that expands and has its impact on people. So that conversation has to be happening. Conversation across faith traditions, conversation across politics, conversation across public and private ownership, all of those conversations together, that interactual and mutual influence brings about that interdependence that is the common good. In terms of the universal destination of goods, he reminds us that the earth's goods are given by God to the entire human family to sustain us. The Christian tradition, not just the Roman Catholic tradition, but the Christian tradition has never recognized the right to private property as absolute, even though we act like that sometimes. And he is he's asking us to include in our thinking around this new forms of property. And those forms of property are patents, algorithms, digital platforms, technological infrastructure, and data. And the third point he makes is that this is all tied to our care for our common home, our responsibility toward the poor today, and our responsibility toward future generations. All of that has to be taken into consideration when we are looking at artificial intelligence, as he will explore later. Subsidiarity is that principle that says the decision should be made as close as possible to those whom that decision impacts. As more commonly said today, nothing about us without us. And he said that principle of subsidiarity is particularly applicable in the digital revolution that we're part of. And that is because, ironically, artificial intelligence has been developed in our world not by governments. It's been developed in our world by a very, very small group of people who are private owners. And we just saw what happened very recently with Mr. Musk and SpaceX going public, making him a trillionaire. That flies in the face of everything this encyclical talks about. So in talking about the digital revolution, seeing that as containing property that belongs to the whole of humanity, it must be directed towards the common good with transparency, accountability, and meaningful forms of participation. Solidarity is the future of each of us is connected to the future of all of us. Just think about that. The future of each of us is connected to the future of all of us. And therefore, decisions around artificial intelligence have to take into account not only the immediate benefit to the very few who become trillionaires based on it, but in the impact on all of us living today and on future generations. Social justice, you know well what it is, everybody on this call. But the litmus test, according to Pope Leo, for social justice is how we treat migrants, refugees, and those forced to move because of poverty, violence, climate change, and environmental disasters. That tells us, are we taking social justice seriously? And then he comes to that point, which is almost like a pivotal point of the development since Pope Leo XIII's time, integral human development. So this encompasses all the dimensions of existence today and is open to all generations following us. Development is integral when it's not just economic, which is what we've kind of, when we talk about sustainable development, we've meant in the past very much economic development, but it's related to spiritual, cultural, moral, and relational development as well. It's connected to respecting our common home and respecting the diversity of peoples and their ways of life. Much integral, not human development, integral human development. The quality of development
Daniel Newman
is measured by the ability to integrate justice toward people and the care of our common home, to promote dignified living conditions, access to necessary goods, just social relations, care of creation, and consideration for future generations. A kind of nice synopsis there. And that's the framework in which now the rest of this encyclical will unfold. So he says, technological innovations, which include artificial intelligence, are not neutral. They can either foster this integral human development or they can damage this integral human development. So the question that he answers for the rest of the encyclical: does human artificial intelligence truly help individuals and peoples to become more humane and collegial while respecting our common home and future generations? If it doesn't, we have to change how it does. So he then does a very humbling thing, and our church is not known for its humility. In the last section, before we move on to the third chapter, he says, social doctrine is not merely a message addressed to society. It is also an examination of conscience for our church, a home and school of communion that is always called to ensure that its principles are also applied. And we know they're not always applied. Living out justice in the church means purifying ecclesial relationships and structures from distortions that give rise to inequality, lack of transparency, and abuse of power. Listening to the victims of spiritual, economic, institutional, sexual, and power-based abuse, as well as abuses of conscience, is an integral part of a journey toward justice. So when Pope Leo is very clear in this encyclical, he's not just speaking to the 10 AI giants of the world. He's not just speaking to the governments of the world. He's not just speaking to the people of the world, but he's speaking to the Roman Catholic Church and its place in all of this as well. And later he will say this, which summarizes everything that's in the introduction and the first two chapters. Artificial intelligence must serve humanity rather than humanity adapting itself to AI without reservation. Human dignity, moral responsibility, work, truth, and peace must remain at the center of technological development. Only then is technological development truly part of integral human development, and only then are we being faithful to the gospel that we follow. So, Robert, that's a very quick summary, hardly mentioning artificial intelligence at all, but setting the foundation for what will evolve now in chapters 3, 4, and 5 of the encyclical.
Thank you very much, Sister Elizabeth. That was a wonderful summary. And I wouldn't dare try to add anything to it. just to give voice to my reaction as I read those first couple of chapters as an Anglican priest and scholar. When I began to read, I felt like an outsider because there's no comparable mechanism in the Anglican Church for such an in-depth theological reflection on any topic, because we do not have the equivalent of a pope, nor do any of the other more Protestant. Anglicans are kind of in between, right? Like we're not really Protestant, but we're not really Catholic either. We're fence sitters. We like to have both ways. So I was really struck by, felt like I was looking through the window of something. But both chapters do a marvelous job of really putting on display the social doctrine of the Roman Catholic Church, which obviously doesn't stay within the Roman Catholic Church, right? It's not like when you go to Las Vegas. What happens in Las Vegas, right? What happens in the social doctrine of the Roman Catholic Church does not stay within the Roman Catholic Church. A perfect example of that was Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, which just still, in my mind, is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, work of public theology of the 21st century.
What's it called?
Laudato Si.
Laudato.
And so I've taken it upon myself here to try to ensure that every student that comes through here will read Laudato Si, because I think it's that important. And I suspect that moving forward, I will have the same attitude towards Magnifica Humanitas, because it is just so important. And both Laudato Si and Magnifica Humanitas rise to meet an important, not only human situation, but really existential situation for human life, but all life on earth. So really, really important documents. And I was really struck by how, and you just reminded us again, how each pope builds on the work of the next. As I was reading, I kept waiting for him to say, Benedict was wrong about this, or John Paul II said this, but he was wrong. But not to say that they didn't, disagree, but it builds each work on the next, which I thought was really impressive. And itself speaks into the time in which we're living in, where we're so polarized, and it's easy to tear others down in order to build yourself up. So that's kind of the things that I was struck. And really, the kind of Catholicism that it presents, which is a far cry from the Catholicism that is represented by the likes of J.D. Vance and other arch conservatives, who I think hide away in Catholicism as use it as a shield, to legitimize their
They don't live it.
conservative social ideologies, to give it cover. Right? And I think Pope Leo is presenting a much more inclusive, not that the Catholic Church is super inclusive on all things, we know the difference of that, but in terms of social doctrine, very progressive. I would imagine there are a lot of progressive evangelicals and Anglicans and other traditions, and people from outside of the church who will read this and be surprised at how progressive the social doctrine of the Catholic Church actually is.
Yeah, and I think, Robert, even though the other churches might not have that same hierarchical structure we have, in a very methodical way that we present doctrine. Remember with Laudato Si what happened immediately after, within months after Laudato Si was proclaimed. Every major world tradition brought out a document supporting that integral ecology approach. And when I, as you know, teaching at Queen's, when I teach ecological interpretation of the scriptures, I refer to those documents. The Yale has a wonderful web page where it just includes all of them from all the different faith traditions, not just Christian traditions either. So what that encyclical did, which I hope this one will also do, it challenges every faith tradition to articulate where it is in this moment, which will be pretty much the same place we are, as I know, to make sure that we start to build that faith-based approach to the dialogue. And Pope Leo is not saying we have all the answers here. Normally our church kind of says that sometimes, but he's not saying we have all the answers. What he's saying, we have a legitimate place in the common discernment that needs to take place. And these are the rules by which we want that discernment to happen. So I'd hope within 1 year, we'll have the Anglican community, we'll have the Buddhist communities, we'll have the Hindu communities, we'll have Jewish communities, right out of their tradition, how they see this very significant aspect now of integral human development that's occurring in our lifetime. And how our tradition, whether it goes back 2,000 years for Christians or it goes back 5,000 years for Hindus, how our traditions have a wisdom that defies all the mistakes we've made, but a very precious wisdom, a thread of wisdom that's gone through all of those centuries and built on itself. So what we have at this moment in our humanity is we have the wonderful wonder of that wisdom that has built on itself over those centuries. And now we're listening to Earth herself to add to even further back that wisdom to enable us to make sure that this artificial intelligence that we're coming to remains part of that trajectory for good, for inclusion, for cares and compassion. So I we'll all do it differently, but I hope what this encyclical does is ignites that to happen.
I hope so too, and I hope it's done in a way that doesn't, and you referenced this earlier, doesn't just condemn,
Yes,
but engages.
exactly.
And engages in a critical way, and in a pastoral way too, because this is a concern for people, but also a concern for the planet. And last thing I'll say before we open it up to other people to speak is, I think this is a good example, as was Laudato Si, an example of when the church speaks to issues that are of concern to people, there is still a goodwill amongst people to listen.
Right.
Right? We tend to think, oh, society doesn't want to hear from the church. But when the church is speaking on matters that really concern people, I think people will listen. I think this encyclical is a good example. It's a very timely piece of work that Pope Leo's done here, because there is a lot of concern, a rising, growing concern amongst people of the implications of artificial intelligence, not only what it will do in terms of a technological perspective, what it'll do to how we communicate, how we hold information, but also the impacts of artificial intelligence and data centers on the ecology of the planet. So I think it's a moment, and you can see that the church is kind of having a moment now. Right? People are, because we're speaking about something that's relevant that people care about.
Exactly. And people
In a particular kind of way.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's all I'll say. Does anybody have any questions or comments? And remember, if you're here in the room, just a raise of the hand or eye contact. If you're online, if you know how to use the hand raising feature, and if you're on a desktop or a laptop, if you put your cursor over the bottom of your screen, you'll see an icon that says react. So if you click on that, we'll give you the hand raising function. If you don't know if that's fit to eat, just raise a hand, wave at us, or if there's a quiet moment of quiet, you can speak your question.
Sister Geraldine, unmute yourself now, Geraldine. can't get unmuted.
You're still muted.
Starlene will go, Geraldine, and help you unmute.
Or you can also type your question or comment in the chat function as well, and then I can read it out to everyone if you would rather do that.
We'll come back to Geraldine when the sister's gone to help her now. Oh, here she is.
There she is.
Should see a microphone icon.
Okay, now can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Elizabeth, I want to thank you for the interconnectedness that you have made from Rerum Novarum to the present day of Pope Leo. But what struck me most was Laudato Si, the prayer of in Laudato Si, how the prayer answers everything about how we are interconnected. I just want to read a few lines from it. The prayer says, "You embrace with tenderness all that exists." You embrace. Another one that's we are brothers and sisters, harming no one. Beautiful. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it. And then, sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. They're speaking to the whole world. And here's something. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain. Talking to the wealthy. Teach us to discover the work of each thing, the worth of each thing, and to be filled with awe and contemplation, a call for the world. And then we thank you for being with us each day, talking to the Lord, for justice, love, and peace. To my mind, I might be not quite right, but I think the prayer from Laudato Si touches from Rerum Novarum right down to Pope Leo's little. Thank you very much.
Geraldine, you're rightly pointing that out. That closing prayer from Pope Francis Laudato Si Pope Leo picks up those same themes and says we have to listen to them when we're looking at how to deal with artificial intelligence. Ironically, when Pope Francis wrote Laudato Si, none of us even knew what artificial intelligence was. And now it's become so dominant in our world. But those same principles that he puts together beautifully in that prayer will be threaded now all the way through Magnifica Humanitas. So Geraldine, thank you for that.
Yes, Sister Elizabeth, you mentioned how quickly artificial intelligence and discussions about artificial intelligence have come to the fore of like popular conversation. When I started here in my full-time capacity in 2022, we had been the recipient of a research grant called Faith and Worship in the Digital Age. And so one of the things that came out of that was a course called Faith and Worship in the Digital Age. So that was in the winter semester of 2022. And I had 1 week in that course where I talked about artificial intelligence. And the people in the class looked at me like I had 10 heads. Like, what are you talking about, artificial intelligence? It sounds like something from science fiction. And here we are in 2026, where I don't think any of us have not been impacted by artificial intelligence in our daily lives. Often not even knowing.
Yes, mostly not even knowing exactly. Right? Yeah.
So that's a very quick turnaround.
And it all happened in November of 2022. So what you started the first part of 2022, ChatGPT went public in November of 2022. And from then on, it's just intensified beyond belief.
It certainly feels like it's taken on a momentum of its own,
Yes.
which again is the alarm. The alarm, I think one of the alarms that Pope Leo is trying to raise is that forces are at work to impose this rather than it be something that is for the common good, that it's something for the gain or profit of a small select few people.
Exactly. And
the challenge is it just feels almost overwhelming because it's happening so fast. But how do you have these private entities who are dominating and forging this adhere to or even understand these guardrails that are so important? They have to buy into it.
Do you want an honest answer? An honest answer is we really can't.
No, we have to because
We do not have a mechanism right now because our entire economic and political system has been turned towards something that's called neoliberalism, which is really capitalism without much
safeguards.
restraint.
yeah,
And so everything now is geared towards corporations and the profit of corporations. So that, this feels like a perfect storm of, or it's a moment for us to be called back to.
Yeah, and that's what struck me. You said it's a moment, and it has to be much more than a moment.
Yes.
It has to be much more than a moment.
Well, it feels, if we're talking about time, this is a kairos moment.
Yeah.
Right? This is a season, maybe, not a moment, it's a
Yeah,
season.
and it's not even back to corporations, sadly, it's back to individuals. You can actually name the 10 individuals in the world, 8 of whom are men, who are actually controlling it. And they're not just, somebody like Elon Musk wants to remake the world in his image. So it's not, once you have $1 trillion, you don't need any more money because there's nothing else you can do with it. But what you can do with that kind of power is remake the world in your image. And that's where it really goes to that extreme that we allow. And he's made most of his money, as you know, from the public purse. Most of his money has come from contracts with governments. So the irony of all of that, talking about what private property means and who private property is not absolute, is totally being disregarded by somebody who has more power than any government might have.
Well, he in plain sight took over the largest democracy on the planet,
right.
probably in history, and took over its purse strings for a few short months. Right? And ironically, Elon Musk in the early days of artificial intelligence was sounding the alarm about artificial intelligence and saying we needed to be very careful until he recognized what Sister Elizabeth just said. Not only can I make a lot of money from this, but I can wield a lot of power over this.
And real power.
Taruka and then Dave.
So as a person who worked in the tech industry and sort of was impacted because of artificial intelligence, I think the tech industry has completely taken the human dignity out of. I don't think there's any human dignity anymore in the industry. Because, there's no human value. The way they treat employees, there's such a big disparity between how they would treat an employee from the Western world and yet have another organization in the rest of the world. There's a big disparity between that. Then there's a disparity between how employee would be terminated. Like sometimes it's just an email at this point, or maybe it's just like a call and then it's like a group call and they're like, okay, all of y'all are gone now. Like, that's it. So I don't know. It's like, I think this document is really interesting, but I hope it goes to, like, I hope it makes a change for the people who are actually making decisions. Because, like, my friend just called and said, like, the same company that I was working at, they had Canadian customers, but they're terminating all the Canadian customers because they hope that they will get customers in the US. So, I mean, they've completely forgotten how they built their whole business from the Canadian customers, because they're looking like totally running behind the financials of getting into the US market. And that, I mean, any tech company, that's the dream, like to get into the US market. And then I don't know, like when I was listening to this, it was very, I think it triggered a little bit of the traumas, but I don't know, it's very complicated, and I don't think in reality, it's like, I think it's a very money driven industry. I know all businesses are money driven, but it's really crazy out there.
And what it does, Taruka, is rightly what you're saying. Like it values people for how productive they are, or how well they perform, or how much money they can generate. So that means people who are ill, people who are elderly, people who have to stay home and take care of their children, they're not productive by that measure, and therefore they're not as important, as valuable as other people. So it has that potential to undermine the dignity of the human person in a way that other technologies in the past haven't been able to do. Some people have said to me, well, this is no different than when we invented fire, or we invented the wheel, or we invented the steam engine. They were all technological developments that changed the course of human history. They were, but none of them were devaluing persons like this has the potential to do. But it also, ironically, has the potential just the opposite, to give us strength, to give us shared equal dignity. And that's what Pope Francis is saying. Artificial intelligence itself is not an evil. It is, neither is it neutral, because it can be used to shape the world one way or the other. And so how do we make sure that this voice for the dignity of all humans and of Earth herself is part of that conversation, and that people don't just assume power and dominance give you the right to determine who humans are or how humans are. So you are so right, so right.
Yeah, and I hear that argument all the time too, Sister Elizabeth, that this is just another technology that we have developed. And, you know, technology always, we create the technology, and then the technology creates us. But I would put this technology, artificial intelligence, on the same level as other human technologies like language and religion.
Interesting.
Or its power either to do something really good or something really devastating. And I don't want to be alarmist, but I think this is kind of where we are. So Dave Newman and then Charles online.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Sister Elizabeth. I'm wondering about, I'd like to speak on behalf of Mr. Musk. Not really, but I wonder if, my only concern is that we'll end up turning AI or Musk capitalism into the disease instead of the symptom. I like a little bit with what you just said a moment ago about from the document. I would think greed, lack of compassion, these sorts of things. If you follow along those instincts which are there, as opposed to, I don't know, I don't think Musk is the the antichrist of theology or mercantile or commerce. I worry that the difference between him and me, when I'm at my worst, is I only have the capacity to be greedy over a few people. So I'm fortunately limited in my sinful capacity by a limited amount I have. That doesn't mean somebody shouldn't be called out. That doesn't mean a system shouldn't be called out, as you know. But I like the church commenting on society, as it should. I also like the fact that it's grounded in scripture and the heart of the gospel, and the sense that there are people out there that are hurting that don't need to be hurting because something is happening in society. And so I think it was a Churchill in the middle of the war with something toward the effect of, democracy. People were saying negative things about it, but he said, this is a different version of it, but something toward the degree of democracy, might be a terrible system, but it's better than all the rest. Yeah. I don't think that can be said for capitalism, but I'm not sure if capitalism is the devil either. And there's so many people out there that, it's part of society that I think if we if we engage society and people on that moral ethic, then we treat the disease as opposed to maybe whatever is the most, just the symptom of the day. That said, I still agree with you that AI is a problem that needs to be engaged, but that's my thought.
No, I totally agree with that, David. And I think that's the wonder for me of those last two articles before the second chapter ends, where Pope Leo says, now remember, all of these things I'm saying apply to the church as much as they do to the state or to the private sector, that all of us together are in this together, and that we have to find that way to find what is the best of us, not the worst of us, if you will. And that's what I like about, from a pedagogical point of view, the fact he goes back in time to the scriptures, and then in our case to the previous social doctrine documents, to pull that thread of wisdom, like to pull the goodness that's been ours all along, to help that give us that energy to continue that. So I agree with you that a Donald Trump or an Elon Musk can exist only because we enable them to exist. They have found the part of us that we try to pretend doesn't exist. And the scriptures tell us, how can you love God whom you cannot see if you don't love your brother whom you see every single day? So we have to have a humility about this that's very much not part of our nature pretty often. A humility that says, this is me we're talking about, not them. And that sense of communal discernment, of collective wondering and collective conversation that he presents as the way forward. I think even his having Christopher Olah there was a statement about that as well as two women theologians, which I appreciated. But I think he was reminding us that it's not enough to say the right words here, that there's something much more pragmatic about this, how we live this out. So I totally agree with what you were saying.
Time is getting short, so we'll go to Charles with the last comment or question.
Unmute.
Yes. Sister Elizabeth, I might say that your lecture was really enlightening, and I really enjoyed it. But I think my comment or my reflection of whatever I've heard, I would say that I find what Reverend Rob's first comment really profound about, he feeling like he was watching from a window. And I think I felt that way because as a Ghanaian and an African at large, whenever I come across a document or any literature about the faith community, there's one question that always comes to mind, and the question is, what is African's role or dispensation in, whatever that I'm reading? And when I asked myself this question, I don't think I got a lot of answers, and it made me more interested into, finding out a lot of, if there's some literature or some documents that talks about African strategy, and whether using or even maximizing AI, and using it for the greater good, or even our understanding of it. And yes, I like I said, I feel like I found what Reverend Roth said really profound, because I also felt like I was looking at whatever was being said, and the document that I've read, I felt that I was looking at it through a window. And I feel like most often we are on the fence of everything. We're not really involved, neither are we taking ourselves away from whatever that is happening. And maybe as the lecture goes on, I would have a clear view of African's dispensation, or our contribution to everything. So yeah, I think I'm looking forward to hearing a lot, and see how I can incorporate whatever that is happening right now to what is happening back home.
And I wish I could give you some comfort here, Charles, but I can't, because I look at everything through a woman's lens. And I have been giving a number of talks on women and AI. And the same thing is happening. All from the majority of humanity can say what you just said. We're looking in on this because none of us have been able to dare to take our place in the conversation. Unlike other technologies in the past, this one is controlled by a very small group of people, And the rest of us feel intimidated by it, whether it's peoples from Africa or women, poor people going to the gathering place for their lunch today. None of us can feel that we have a place in this conversation. We're not invited to the conversation. We don't see how we can get into that conversation. And my hope is that Pope Leo's document is going to give other faith traditions the impetus to do the same thing, to create their documents in their style, from their perspectives. And I gave one small, simple talk on women and AI, and 10 different groups have asked me since to give them, of women, asked me to give them that talk. So that little tiny, tiny bit that I've done, which is to simply say women have no place in this, that's not good enough, has ignited at least that little tiny spark. So I am hoping Pope Leo, with his audience, is going to get much bigger sparks. And that's what happened with Pope Francis' encyclical. So I'm hoping it will happen with this as well, because you're not going to find your voice in the rest of the encyclical. My voice is very much not in the rest of the encyclical. But I hope those sparks will help us then have the courage to find our voices.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say, I just saw a hand go up, but we're running out of time, so
Okay.
make it quick.
That is a-
1:15, we're done. So,
Oh, okay, forget
yeah.
it.
So last thing I was going to say, and this is a word to Charles, and to all of us really, in reading a document like this, talking about a topic like this, is to read it through the lens of colonialism as well, which is really, colonialism is a history of extractive technologies being used against other countries and cultures in order to prop up white Euro-American culture and society. So approaching it from that lens, Charles, might help you get a window into kind of what are the implications of this for Ghana, for Africa, for women, for people with disabilities, right? There's going to be a lot of intersections in these conversations, different terminologies, and they all intersect with each other. race, gender, social and economic background, poverty, all these things are going to come together, which really can be viewed through the bigger lens of colonialism, I think. And I don't know if Leo is going to use that language a lot. He maybe used it in passing in this week's chapters. But, you know, from your perspective, that may be a helpful way to come at it. You can be quick. You can
No.
just want to be mindful of people's time.
This will wait just as well for next.
Okay. Yeah. So next week, same time, same channel. And next week, I'll try to do some background work on kind of how we got here. How do we get to this moment in 2026 when this form of technology that we call artificial intelligence has risen to such prominence? And really, because artificial intelligence really doesn't make sense unless we view it in the bigger context of digital technology. So I'll try to do some of that stuff very quickly next week and provide some more time for conversation. So thank you all, and we'll see you.
So Robert,
next week.
before you go, do we use the same link next week or do you get a new link?
No, same link every week, but what I will do next week to make everybody's life easier, because that's the kind of person I am, is I will send out an email Monday morning so you don't have to go searching back through your emails to try to find the link. Okay? And if you're in town, you're more than welcome to come in here to the college and be on site with us.
To say, one suggestion. Could you please also make sure the ID is included in when you send the link?
Okay, yeah.
That's the sister
the
from
idea.
Peru speaking, Robert. So
Yeah.
Yes, some of us in Peru are listening. So thanks a million, Elizabeth, and thank you so much for the opportunity, because I think good part of the problem in the majority of the population in the world is ignoring not only the good effects, but also the very, very bad effects of artificial intelligence. They know the word artificial intelligence, but any kind of the simplest understanding of what it means is zero. I think it's beyond any conversation, beyond any main preoccupation, the one on artificial intelligence. So thank you very much for the opportunity to listen to this. Of course, I understand English. That's why I was able to get into this. But the majority of my people don't understand English. Okay.
Thank you for joining us.
So thanks, Robert, for hosting this, and we'll talk next week again.
Take care, everyone.